I wanted the external world to change for me, to suit me. And you might relate to that. I wanted this particular thing to stop so that I would be happy. And the problem is when we try to change the external world to suit us, who is the us? Who is the me we're trying to satisfy? Always, it's the small self. It's the programmed self-image that we've collected over time. It's the ego trying to feel safe and certain, control. And so what ironically this is doing is it's actually creating separation consciousness. One of the very common themes that humans experience that creates so much anxiety and depression and dis-ease in life is this feeling of powerlessness. For me in my own life, this has been a theme. It was a theme all through my childhood, my teens, my 20s, my 30s, and now in my 40s, I can finally understand it better. And I see what I needed to see, but I had to go on a journey to get there. For me personally, I've always had a really kind of sensitivity to noise. There's names for this, I believe, but personally, I never went and got diagnosed with anything. I just tried to understand myself. And this noise sensitivity would cause me immense amounts of feelings of powerlessness. And this would present in emotions like frustration, resentment, anger even, and sometimes rage. And I would feel like I was out of control when I would drop into these emotions, because powerlessness is the feeling of not being in control anymore. And for many of us, that's one of the scariest things out there, this idea that we're not going to have control. And this was a theme in my life. I developed bulimia, which is an eating disorder directly associated with these themes of control. And also one of the things, you know, it's hard to avoid noise when you live in an urban life, and I do. And so I have noise sensitivities to dogs barking, to babies screaming, to lawnmowers, to electric tools, to, you know, people talking loudly. And these are everyday things that are part of this life experience. So you can imagine that in this state of sensitivity, the feelings of powerlessness has really increased to a certain point where you kind of retreat. And you might relate to that if you are someone who also is sensitive in that way. Now, the problem when you create an issue around noise, even if it's unconscious, even if it's programmed in, is that whenever you hear noise, you have this resistant reaction, a feeling of resistance, like it shouldn't be there, like it's a problem. And the irony is that life will present you with a situation to resolve, and continuously and repeatedly, and it will seem like it's endless, because everywhere I would go, every house I would move to would have another noise situation that was particularly worse than your average situation. And I would question, I'm like, what? Why again? Why do I have this problem in my area with noise? It would happen every time. But this is how it works. We're presented with scenarios so that we face the resistance, which we are creating, which is the alternative, the opposite of acceptance. And so what we resist persists indeed, and what we focus on grows. So if we make a big deal about something like the dogs barking next door, then you can be sure that you're growing that situation. And it becomes worse. It becomes way worse than it could if you accepted it. But I'll get to that in a moment. I wanted the external world to change for me, to suit me. And you might relate to that. I wanted this particular thing to stop so that I would be happy. And the problem is when we try to change the external world to suit us, who is the us? Who is the me we're trying to satisfy? Always, it's the small self. It's the programmed self-image that we've collected over time. It's the ego trying to feel safe and certain, control. And so what ironically this is doing is it's actually creating separation consciousness, because we separate ourself, our small self, because the higher self already knows that all is one. The small self perceives itself as separate and under threat. And so we create this separation consciousness with the outside world. And we perceive ourselves as separate from our environments, from Mother Earth, from those around us, from the trees, from even the electrical tools in our reality, from the cars, from whatever sources of noise in my example would be. I perceived myself as separate, and I wanted to get back that control. So separation consciousness is rife in someone who believes that they have to maintain control with the small self according to its programs. So the irony is this moves you further from the truth and into more layers of illusion. And instead of becoming at peace and at one with all, which is what true peace is, it's recognizing everything is as it should be in that moment, in the present moment. And you don't have to use the small self to feel safe anymore. You recognize that you are pure awareness having a human experience. And so there's no more need to see yourself through your lens of perception as separate. And so, of course, as a result of seeing the external world as separate, as a nuisance, as something in the way, as something that's not complying to the ego's control structure, we feel powerless. And this leads to the emotions of frustration and anger and resentment and rage even. So these states will bring us, as you probably know, if you're a human, right down into very low vibratory frequencies. And when you're in those lower states and you perceive yourself as separate, you're missing out on flow. And I've talked a lot about flow. Flow comes from being present and curious like a child. Flow comes from surrender, from letting go of the self-image, the idea that you are a small, separate self who needs to stay safe. And so flow is what we ideally want to be if we're going to feel that unity consciousness. But when you are in these states of resentment and fear and powerlessness, you're in the opposite of surrender. So this is the egoic state of control that I'm talking about, that I'm implying. So how do we be free of this pattern? You know, this is the question so many of my clients ask me. They come to me for this very reason, for control, because they're afraid to let go and allow flow. Well, first, I believe that as a side note, understanding the root cause of why you fall into these states of powerlessness and control, it is helpful to know these things, to illuminate those shadows and look at the childhood traumas and wounding, the core wounding as to why you have this illusion of separation, of abandonment, of rejection, often is related to that. And that is my story. I grew up in a very chaotic, huge family. And so I felt out of control, and you know, I had a very heavy-handed discipline system put over me, and so I never felt my own sense of autonomy or ability to be curious about what I wanted to grow and transform into. And so as a reaction, I developed 20 years of eating disorder to try and control something in my environment because I didn't understand any of this. And so I also developed this sensitivity to noise as a hypervigilant act of safety to keep myself safe. And it's all tied up in the nervous system and fear of being vulnerable to some unknown force. And of course, this is all an illusion. So understanding the root cause is helpful, but I'm not talking about that today, because what I found is I spent a long time looking at my childhood traumas and doing amazing, powerful shadow work, which has been transformative in itself to help me accept myself and release a lot of stuck emotions. But what I'm talking about that really helped me to understand how to overcome or release this idea of powerlessness and be free of this pattern of the perception of separation is really liberating myself from this story that I was separate and that I had to maintain safety. The first thing that really dynamically changed my perception, which is what we need to do when we want to move from separation consciousness into unity consciousness, it's a perception, a paradigm shift, is to stop labeling, stop critiquing, and stop judging the world around us. And that includes ourselves. So stop categorizing, stop preferencing. All of these ways of viewing the world, for one, filter out information. So we're blocking information. And two, limit us, extremely limiting, to be stuck in a self-labeled paradigm. So we want to be able to see the world through a lens that is not filtered or muddied by these limitations of programming. We want to see the full picture. And that's what I believe is the meaning behind eyes to see, is we're no longer blocking the truth through our limited lens or egoic lens of perception. We want to see the world as a child would. So if you think about way back when you're a child, there was a lot less programming that had been installed, a lot less socialization yet. And so we were able to be very present because it's something that we learn to live in the past and live in the future. It's something we learn through our culture, through our society. But as a child, children don't hold a lot of repressed emotions because everything is experienced in the moment. They are not prejudiced against their own experiences. They're not labeling something as good or bad or appropriate or inappropriate socially. They're just experiencing it purely and innocently in the moment. So really, the undoing of our programming, the way that we can be free of this pattern of powerlessness and separation consciousness, is to go back to the eyes of a child, to that beautiful innate curiosity that we all have, to sense the wonder and awe of what we're seeing without the filters of labeling and judging and critiquing, which block and distract us. And now suddenly all phenomena is new to us and wondrous and magical again. And this takes practice because we've spent a lifetime creating these habits of filtering our perception through these programs that we've been installed, beliefs, values, experiences. But we really need to surrender to all possible foes, if you like, all perceived dangers by dissolving our entire reality into them. And that sounds crazy, but the truth of the matter, that is unity consciousness. We no longer have these filters or foes of perception. The ordinary and the mundane become a marvel again. you know. I like to liken it as seeing the world as this performance art project, this performance art piece. Everything is wondrous again. See the world as a smorgasbord of abstract art, if you like, because we're not labeling it anymore. Now, if you're noise sensitive like I am sometimes still, I've had to learn to attune to my real needs, you know, without listening to the small self trying to stay safe from a perceived enemy. I've had to attune to my real needs. And we can't do that unless we actually stop and spend intentional time in stillness, in surrender, and intentional time in rest and relaxation as well. Quiet, solitude, stillness. These are not luxuries for when all the work is done. These are actually necessities to integrated life, a healthy life. And when we let go of these labels, when we stop looking through the lens of the small self, through the identity, the personality, we can let go of agenda. And that's what control encompasses. It encompasses agenda. We have an agenda, ultimately, if we dig right down, to keep us safe from an illusory enemy. But the truth is we have no need for control. We do not need to fit ourselves into a specific box to stay safe. And by doing this, by letting go of all of this labeling, critiquing, and judging, we actually allow ourselves to see, as I mentioned, much more, far more information that's always been there, but we're now no longer blocking it through our limited lens. So this moves us into greater possibility. The mind is incapable of really encompassing full reality. And that's why in my own life, my philosophy is to master the mind, but make it the servant to the heart. So the paradigm shift we need to move into is living through the heart. The heart doesn't have a personality that's been created out of trauma. It's only the mind. And so we need to move out of constantly overanalyzing, overthinking, the monkey mind that keeps us safe. Because then we can actually understand full reality much, much, much better. And again, this moves us into greater possibility in our lives. So this is about surrender. This is about letting go of our opinions, of our fears, of our beliefs, and even our hopes. So if you're struggling with feelings of powerlessness in your life, I would encourage you to challenge the lens of perception that you're using to see your world around you. And look at how a lot of it is based in the mind that is the small self, that is keeping you safe, the mind that is keeping you small, and the mind that is based on an illusion. In a life that is via the heart, we have to surrender. We have to let go of this self-image and this built-up concept of who we are, and begin again as a child, seeing the world as the wonderfully awe-inspiring experience that it really is. I hope this has been encouraging for you and that you can become free of this illusion of powerlessness and come into your full realization of your full power and experience the beauty of that. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, and share, and have a beautiful, powerful day. See ya.